We are coming up on the first 100 days of Trump's second term as president. I want to go through this and other big stories with my special guest, Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, thank you for joining me again.
It's my pleasure.
So, some background. Dinesh is an author and a filmmaker, also the host of the Dinesh D'Souza podcast. Okay, I want to just you've made so many films, so you think differently than a lot of people because you have to think in pictures and setup and scenario. You've done films like Vindicating Trump, Police State, 2000 Mules, Obama's America. So understanding filmmaking and also understanding propaganda and gaslighting, the mainstream media is telling us Donald Trump is failing, that he's doing worse than his first presidency. In fact, this is the worst first 100 days of any president in 80 years. I'm not personally seeing it. Maybe I'm missing it. What are your thoughts on all of this information being pushed out?
I think that the exact opposite is true. Now, we live at a time when we have learned, I think, wisely to distrust polls and to distrust media because both are highly manipulable, but also manipulated. So I'm open to the idea that the American people are sort of in seething and silent revolt against Trump, but you'd have to really show me some evidence that that is in fact the case. I was looking at some of the questions in the Washington Post poll, for example, and they're so tendentious. They're written with in a way that you're soliciting the answer you want to get. Now, I will say, as a conservative, longtime Reaganite, but also defender of Trump, somebody who's sympathetic to the MAGA agenda, although I'm not part of the administration, I'm delighted with what Trump is doing because I think that the country is, or at least was, somewhat at the edge of the precipice. Economically, things were a mess. I think we were losing our civil liberties. That was the point of the movie Police State. And so there was a real need to move in a different direction. And that's going to cause a tremendous amount of disruption because we're not just moving away from what Democrats do, but also what Republicans have traditionally acquiesced in. So, for example, if you look at our debt, Democrats, for the most part, did it, but Republicans went along and partly went along for their own reasons. Republican congressmen and senators have to be reelected also, and big spending helps them in a way to do that. So Trump is shaking things up at such a fundamental level. I haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime. I'm not surprised it's producing some tremor and some discomfort, but I think it is necessary.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Bill O'Reilly said last night, Trump is a change agent. And so you're going to have people very polarized because some of them are ready to move into the future and others want to cling on to the past. Fox News was up interviewing people for the rally that Trump will be hosting and up in Michigan. And they asked, what is the number one thing that you believe President Trump has done right in his first 100 days? And overwhelmingly, people were satisfied with what he's done on the border, closing down the invasion of our country, starting the roundup of getting illegals out, especially the criminals, shipping people off to El Salvador, getting the military on the border for the first time in many, many years. What do you think about that? And is there something else in your mind that you think he's done better?
Well, I think that he has done something that is very different than, say, Reagan. When I was in my 20s, I was a policy analyst under Reagan. Reagan's approach was that you cannot change the world in 40 ways. You can change the world in maybe 2 ways or 3. So what you do is you focus kind of laser-like on the biggest issues and you kind of let everything else go. And that's what happened with Reagan. He focused on the Soviet Empire and the Cold War. He focused on tax cuts. He had 1 or 2 other priorities, but other stuff, affirmative action, all this stuff was going on, and Reagan paid little or no attention to it. What strikes me as remarkable about Trump is that in the second term, I think this is the result of kind of his trial by fire. He's decided to attack on all fronts. And this is really the ingenuity and genius of it, because the left starts screaming about one thing. Oh, they've deported this guy to El Salvador, and then suddenly 2 judges are arrested. Oh, he's arresting judges now, and then boom, he does the tariffs. And so what's happening is he's moving so quickly that it's difficult for the left to gain traction on any single point of resistance. So yeah, the border is critical, but I think no less critical is DOGE, which is this kind of, if DOGE was nothing more than just a systematic audit of the government, revealing all the madness that goes on here with taxpayer money, it would be useful. But the fact that they're actually changing the way government does business, I did not expect to see that. That's I think, a very significant development. No Democrat or Republican in the last 40 or 50 years has shown the ability to cut any government program.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. Ronald Reagan's son, Michael Reagan, said, Trump has a completely different set of problems. When my father was president, he took on the Soviet Union. It was an external threat. Trump is now taking on an internal threat that my father didn't have to deal with. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And in some ways, internal threats are often more insidious, because when an external threat comes along, you can quickly recognize the Stalin overcoat, the Hitler mustache, the Soviet tanks rolling through the streets, and you're like, wow, we don't want that here in America. But when you have an internal threat and the government starts saying, well, we've got to keep you safe, and so we're going to start monitoring all your data to keep track of your movements, your money. We're going to know everything about you, or we're going to make you take a vaccine. But you know what? It's for your own health benefit. We're doing you a favor by forcing you to do this. And if we fire you for not taking the vaccine, that's to protect other people's lives. So the sort of benevolence with which tyrannical things start coming down your way. I mean, Tocqueville saw a hint of this in the 1820s in America, but it's reached a whole new level. So yes, I think Trump is dealing with an entirely different landscape. And things also that have gone wrong over the past 40 years. I mean, we've decimated so many middle-class communities. And that has produced not only economic devastation, but it's produced broken families, spiritual sense of anomie or loneliness, drugs. And so repairing and restoring these communities, I think, is a top priority of the Trump administration, and rightly so.
Yes, I agree. Okay, you mentioned using our own data to track us for our own benefit. You made the film 2000 Mules, which exposed the ballot harvesting and pay for ballot scheme in Georgia. I believe that movie was shown to Trump and many others at his property and around the country. It did significantly well. I had people, talking to me about it. Why didn't we see those same shenanigans in the 7 swing states on Trump? And do you believe that the 2020 election is going to be reviewed by Kash Patel or Tulsi Gabbard or Trump?
I don't know. This is going to be an interesting question within the administration. Do we want to revisit 2020, or do we want to let it go? Now, there are quite a few conservatives who believe, and I have to admit, I agree with this, that had Trump won in 2020, he would have been besieged, up against the wall, continuing investigation. So ironically, Trump, having, quote, lost in 2020 has turned out to be beneficial because it's given us the Trump we have now. Now, that being said, I think Trump himself is very eager to demonstrate that he won in 2020. He hates to lose. He's firmly convinced he won. One of the most preposterous things that was said about him in the lawfare against him was he knew he lost, but he was pushing ahead anyway. No, this is a guy who absolutely believes 100% that he won Georgia, that he won the other swing states. So I think that the reason that we didn't see the same kind of cheating in 2024 is quite simply because once you bust a certain type of theft scheme, it's very difficult to do it again. And so we had all this video, we had all this cell phone geo-tracking. So a lot of people were looking for that kind of stuff. So if mules show up in the middle of the night, they have backpacks full of ballots, they look left and right, they, are wearing latex gloves, they're taking photographs of the ballots going into the box. There are going to be people who would be recording that. And so I think, in a way, not that we eliminated cheating, but we eliminated that way of cheating. in 2024. And I think that may have helped to save the 2024 election.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like once somebody's on to a magician's act, he's got to create a new act, right? Because now we see, okay, there's the floating bar and the smoke. Okay. So they're just moving on to new tricks. Although I will say, in all of the areas where they counted past the election, a Democrat won almost every time. Everywhere that they finished on election night, it seemed like a Republican won. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking for patterns. What is your take on the tariff situation? I was on somebody's show yesterday. They said, I don't think the tariffs are working. And then I listed off about 20 reasons why I thought they were working. What are your thoughts on the tariff situation?
I'm willing to give them a chance. I'm the product of a school of economics that is sort of strongly opposed to tariffs. It all goes back to a premise that's right there in Adam Smith in the kind of founding documents of economics, which is this: that when two people engage in a trade or a transaction, it is not only mutually beneficial for both, but each party must value the transaction differently from the other. So in other words, if you sell me a bar of soap and I'm willing to pay, let's just say $5 for that bar of soap, I actually value the bar of soap higher than $5 and you value it less than $5. And if that were not the case, we would have no reason to trade. So the trade is actually based upon the peculiarity that the buyer and seller attach a different value to the same product. But it benefits both. It's good for you to get the $5. It's good for me to get the soap. And there's no reason that isn't true of international trade as well. Now, where the Trump people come in is they say, listen, that is true. They accept the premise, but they go, what if you've got all these barriers that have been put up by the other side? Then are we supposed to simply grin and bear it and say, okay, you can have barriers, but we won't? Or does it make sense for us diplomatically to say to you, listen, buddy, you have all these barriers. We're going to put some up of our own. Now, if you take yours down, then we'll take ours down also. So I understand the negotiating and leverage aspect of the tariffs. And so I think that we should let them play out and let's see how it works.
Yeah. So I think some of the peripheral benefit that I see from it is Trump has almost $5.2 trillion in committed capital from Apple, Microsoft, IBM. Japan is saying, wait a minute, we can't really do much in Japan. We're going to invest in America, almost $1 trillion they're committing. Saudi Arabia, $500 billion. So you've got all of these big players that are saying, under Trump, we feel America is safe. We feel America's going to grow. I think putting up those tariffs, coming in with that strong mafia boss, like I'm not messing around mentality, it actually attracted a lot of money, which is going to produce a lot of jobs. We're also seeing the way that they shut down the border. They leveraged the tariffs against Mexico to now put soldiers on the border. Look at what's going on with shutting things down with Canada. So I think there's a lot of peripheral things, but like that money's going to flow in. And over the next 5 years, we're going to see an increase in middle income wages and all of these good things. So for me, I agree with you. I think we got to give time to allow these things to go in. But just right off the bat, the fact that all this money was flowing in was really interesting to me.
Well, I think it shows you why we need to kind of reassess some of our ancient assumptions about these things, because everything that you said appears in no textbook. The way that textbooks discuss tariffs is really quite simple. And that is that tariffs will drive up the price of these imported products, that this will hurt the consumer because those products are going to be more expensive. You'll be more likely to see people deflecting to buying more domestic products. And that there could be job benefits because in some ways those businesses will now, it'll be an inducement for businesses at home to make those same types of products. But nowhere in the whole tariff debate do we hear about the way tariffs can be leveraged to, for example, secure a border. I've never seen that anywhere in the literature, and yet we've seen it come to pass. Second of all, the idea that tariffs now create an incentive for other countries to want to circumvent those tariffs. And so they all show up at Trump's door saying, companies saying we'll start making our products over here, not over there. All of this, I think Trump is demonstrating that there's a wider angle of vision in looking at these things than we would previously have thought. And this is part of the reason why I say that, this guy has a certain canny sense of how to combine politics, economics, and just good old-fashioned arm twisting to achieve a beneficial result.
With everything that's happening in the U.S. economy, it feels like we're walking on shaky ground. Prices are stuck at really high levels, and it seems like nothing is affordable anymore. It's no wonder many are relying on credit cards to cover the gaps. Credit card debt is skyrocketing, and it's leaving a lot of people stressed out. If you're a homeowner, you don't have to face this uncertainty alone. My friends at American Financing can help you take control. They can help you access the debt in your home to help you pay down the high interest credit card debt, giving you peace of mind and real saving. On average, people just like you are saving $800 a month. That's $10,000 a year. Plus, they may close your loan in as little as 10 days. Don't let the chaos of the economy get the best of you. Call American Financing now. It costs you nothing to get started, and you might be able to delay 2 mortgage payments, putting some extra cushion in your bank account. Give them a call at 888-686-8030 or visit americanfinancing.net/Gardner. Again, that's 888-686-8030. Yeah. I think one of the advantages of, decades of experience, especially in real estate, sometimes you got to get really creative to get your financing. And so I think Trump is just used to that, like, okay, where's the creative thinking to use this differently than we've used it in the past. So again, I'm just giving time to see where this goes. Okay, want to get your thoughts on this because you brought up Doge as one of the best things that's happened in 100 days. The New York Post had an economist on this week that said all of the efforts of Elon Musk and Doge are a total waste because Congress will just turn around and increase spending. What are your thoughts on this? And are there, just like the tariffs, are there side benefits to what Doge has done that we would have never seen regardless of what Congress spends or doesn't spend?
So to me, this is a little bit of a kind of a non sequitur. And what I mean by that is that we have 2 separate problems. One is that there are built-in incentives for Congress to keep increasing spending. Even Republicans are reluctant to cut. And not to mention the fact that once spending increases enter the law, they become taken for granted. And even in Republican states, it's very hard to go back to the farmers and say, we added these subsidies during COVID, but now we're going to take them away. So all elected officials are highly sensitive to this. And in some ways, you could say they would even recklessly spend the country into bankruptcy rather than jeopardize their own reelection, which is a kind of chilling thing to say, but it happens to be true. A separate issue is that once this money comes over to the executive branch, you have absolute irresponsibility in the way that the money is dispersed and allocated. And Milton Friedman once had a kind of a beautiful diagram, which was divided into 4 quadrants. In the upper left quadrant, he talked about people who spend their own money on things that they are familiar with, kind of like if you spend your own money on your own business. And Friedman's point is that it's your money. You're going to be very careful with it. Excuse me. And you know what you're spending it on. So you're going to be prudent in the way you spend that money. The second quadrant is if you spend your own money, but it's on something you don't know about. Kind of like if you give it away to charity. You don't really know if they're going to use it well, but at least you're going to be somewhat careful because it's your money that you're deploying. The third possibility is that if you're not spending your money, you're spending someone else's money, but it is on something you know about. So someone else, for example, invests in your business. it's their money, not yours, but it is your business. And so you're going to be somewhat prudent. But the worst case, the fourth quadrant, is you're spending somebody else's money on something you don't know about. That is basically the way government works. They have huge oceans of money coming in. They're spending on things they don't even know about. So they end up saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, let's promote basket weaving in Afghanistan. Okay, let's assign another $50 million over here to enhance the internet connections in Gambia. They know nothing about Gambia. They've never been to Gambia. They don't know what the state of the internet is over there. But it's not their money. Who cares? So Doge is showing the degree to which, I mean, I think for people, Americans who have hard-earned money, and they realize, hey, I'm making, $75,000, and 15 of that is going in taxes, and this is what these barbarians are spending it on. I mean, Doge, I think, is impressing that realization on the public psyche. So that's a big public service.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. What a great example. Elon Musk didn't articulate it as well as you did, but he basically said on Joe Rogan, you've got a bunch of people that don't care spending other people's money, and when they're that busy, and it starts to compound, right? Like, we're spending on money on stuff that the 170th Congress put into place, and now we're in this era. And so going back through, I think, Musk leaving is not going to be the end of Doge. We may not see the big fanfare and the Fox News interviews and all of that, because he's got to get back. But one of my favorite things about the Elon Musk Doge situation, whether Congress adds more money or not, is exposing just how much fraud there was in USAID. I mean, using our money against us to invade our country, using our money against us to, prop up somebody's wife or child in a fake charity or an NGO that means harm to America, or really has no benefit to Americans or the American taxpayer. What was your thought when you started seeing all of the different areas that USAID money was being spent?
Well, I began to realize, for example, that in Washington, D.C., everybody's wife or brother-in-law or cousin runs an NGO. Why? Because this is the way, in India, where I grew up, politicians can take money directly and they just stick it in their pockets. In America, you can't do that. But that doesn't mean people aren't doing that. You just need a little bit more of a facade, a little bit more of a roundabout system. And so the NGO plays that role. The money doesn't go to the politician directly. It goes to the NGO. But the NGO recognizes where the money is coming from. And so some of that filters back to family members who would always end up being the vice president of the NGO. And the NGO also ends up spending on the Democratic Party. So in other words, there's a political kickback that is, we're going to use this money to elect the politicians who will keep the money flowing our way. It was highly telling that real estate values in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas, Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, dropped like, $100,000 on average after this expose, because suddenly that money becomes, that kind of flow of money becomes disrupted. The other thing Elon Musk said, a small detail but highly telling, is that he found multiple money printers in the federal government. Now, this is a very scary idea, because we all kind of know in the back of our mind that the government can print money, but we think that that is being done only by the Federal Reserve, this kind of independent agency which has the ability to conjure money out of thin air. But Elon Musk says that no, you've got agencies of the federal government that are not taking congressional allocations. They're in effect running a money printer, producing cash and then giving it out. I mean, this is a massive, I don't think there's been quite enough attention on this, but it's a huge scandal if in fact it's true.
Wow. Yeah. That reminds me of my childhood show, The Goonies, where they find that money printer in the basement. And wow. Unreal. I think Elon Musk has done such a service to our country. And how did a portion of the country thank him? Trying to destroy his business, trying to drive his stock into the ground, Molotov cocktail. I mean, just embarrassing. I was embarrassed of my fellow Americans that would behave that way. Just not the way to do it. Right?
Well, I mean, I think it shows that it's not just bad behavior. What it really shows is that this flow of government waste, we call it waste. It's not waste because it's no more waste than if banks are regularly robbed. That is waste. Somebody's benefiting from those robberies, right? There's a whole system of larceny and robbery and looting of the taxpayer, but it's going to someone. It's ending up in somebody's account. All those people are big mad, as they say, at Elon Musk. So I think what's going on here is that this guy has kicked up a hornet's nest. He has disrupted very powerful governmental interests, and that's why they're going after him with so much venom.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's been cashing those 20 million fraudulent Social Security checks. So there's 20 million people out there going, this guy got in the way of my money. He interrupted my cash flow, but they can't come forward and complain because then they're going to rat themselves out. I mean, I'm hoping at some point they start knocking on those doors. Maybe James O'Keefe knocks and says, hey, you've been, cashing the American taxpayer check for 10 years. Where's that money? We want that money back.
This is why I think it's really important for the DOJ to prosecute some of those people. You may not have to prosecute all of them, but, look at government contracts. Elon Musk says that you have government contracts that were undertaken 15 years ago, right? To do a specific task. Then that particular bureaucrat leaves, somebody else comes in, and they have been dutifully paying the contract, even though there are no services being provided anymore. They just keep paying the contract for years and years and years. And similarly, they hire these consultancy services to do things like, let's improve the IT, the information technology of an agency. Now, these consultants bill by the hour. So they realize that once they get the contract, this should be a job that should never be finished. You're constantly upgrading the IT, and no one is actually keeping an eye on what this is costing. So years go by, you pay more and more and more money. Obviously, if they finish the job, the paychecks would stop. And so the IT is never, in fact, upgraded because keeping the improvement going is the name of the game.
Yeah. Wow. Unlike McMahon, who's over the Department of Education, Trump said, "I want you to do such a good job, you're out of a job." That will be the signal that you've done a good job. But these people, they keep it going. Okay, I know, and we've got a time ceiling here. My last question for you, Dinesh. Congressman Sri Thanader, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's filing 7 articles of impeachment against President Trump: obstruction of justice, usurpation of appropriation power, abuse of trade power, violation of First Amendment rights, creation of an unlawful office, Doge, bribery and corruption, undermining democracy. You think these go anywhere, or is this guy, as Laura Loomer says, putting up a big fuss because he's got $800,000 in re-election debt that he needs to pay off? What are your thoughts on this guy?
First of all, he's the absolute. It's not surprising that somebody has filed these articles, right? Trump has already been impeached twice. I might have expected it to come more from an AOC type or somebody like that, someone who's a more recognized face of the Democratic Party. This guy is the absolute worst poster boy of doing this because he looks like he's like a taxi driver straight off the streets of Mumbai. He's got the thick accent. He's exactly like the guy you'd run into like in 7-Eleven. Now, he's in fact an educated guy. A chemistry guy with a master's degree and even a PhD. He's an entrepreneur. But I think really, the optics of it are just absolutely horrendous. It's kind of like, imagine if a guy like you went to India, to the parliament, and said, "I'm impeaching the prime minister," right? People go, "Wait, what? Who is this guy? Who's this white man showing up in brown-skinned India threatening to impeach the head of state?" So I think that with this guy who looks like he's straight, like off the boat, the sheer optics are enough to inspire in most people, I think, a sense of revulsion, if not disgust. And so I don't think this is really going to go anywhere. And you would think the Democrats would have been a little smarter about it and produced a little better front man.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, Dinesh, thank you so much for coming on. I want to encourage everybody, go check out Dinesh's podcast, the Dinesh D'Souza podcast. I'll put some direct links down below. Any upcoming movies that you're ready to announce or working on?
Well, I'll just mention that in conjunction with Salem Media, we just got back from 9 days in Israel. I'm making a different kind of movie. My movies have been very political, historical, very America focused. This one is on a little different topic. The topic's being covered in this film of biblical archaeology, the current situation in the Middle East, but also a hint of biblical prophecy. So I'm moving into a little different territory with this next project, but it's very exciting, very interesting, and very relevant to what's going on in the world today.
Okay, great. I look forward to seeing it and having you back on. Thank you very much for coming on. I hope